If you're going to impersonate a cop, at least check whose house you're knocking on first. That's the exact line I said, coffee in one hand and bathrobe barely tied, to the two clowns standing on my porch at 12:42 in the afternoon. I remember the time because I had just reheated my lasagna and was halfway through episode 4 of a detective show so bad it was good. The knock at the door wasn't aggressive, more like impatient. The kind of knock someone does when they think they're in control of the situation. And when I opened the door and saw two guys dressed like they got kicked out of a Halloween supply store clearance bin, I almost choked on my coffee. One of them was wearing what looked like tactical cargo pants and a badge on a lanyard. A lanyard. The other had mirrored sunglasses and fingerless gloves. No belts, no radios, not even name tags. One had on a shirt that said, Neighborhood Task Authority, which, last I checked, wasn't a thing. The taller one cleared his throat and puffed up his chest like he was going to start narrating a true crime documentary. He said, Sir, step outside. You're in violation of Code 41B, improper fence extension. I stared at him for a solid 3 seconds, thinking maybe this was some HOA prank or TikTok nonsense. But his face was dead serious. You're being asked to comply by the Neighborhood Enforcement Division, he added. The other guy shifted his weight like he was preparing to restrain me. I took a sip of my coffee and tilted my head. You two come here in a clown car, or did the circus drop you off? They didn't laugh. Not even a flinch. The taller guy squinted at me. This is a serious matter, sir. We can detain you if necessary. Now I've seen a lot in my years as a cop. Domestic disputes, drug busts, even a full-on standoff in a strip mall. But never, and I mean never, had I seen two grown men so confidently wrong about what they were doing. And that's saying something considering I've spent 22 years in law enforcement. And here they were, on my porch, threatening to detain me with all the authority of a kid with a fake badge in a playground. I glanced past them to the street and saw a white pickup truck with the words, Civic Neighborhood Operations, taped to the side in bold inkjet font. Scotch tape. You can't make this stuff up. I looked back at them and gave the kind of smile you save for people who don't know they've just stepped in something deep. You guys got badge numbers? I asked. The shorter one looked at the taller one. The taller one said, We don't give out badge numbers to non-compliant residents. That's when I almost lost it. I actually had to suppress a laugh. Okay, I said, setting down my coffee mug on the porch railing. Let me help you out. You're trespassing. And impersonating law enforcement. Which, last I checked, is a felony. That's when the shorter guy reached into his back pocket and pulled out a pair of what I swear were plastic zip ties. Sir, we're asking you nicely. Come with us and we can avoid escalation. I raised an eyebrow. Escalation? I asked, stepping back into the house. You sure about that? They started to follow, but I lifted a single finger. Don't. I opened the drawer beside the door, pulled out my actual badge, gold, polished, and real, and held it in their faces. Chief Matthew Darrow. County Police Department. Congratulations, boys. You just committed a crime on the porch of the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the county. The silence that followed could have made a dog cry. The taller one blinked rapidly. The other one took a half-step back, visibly shaking. You're a cop? He stammered. Not just a cop, I said. The cop. The one your HOA probably should have Googled before sending you here. The shorter one did exactly what I expected. He bolted. Just turned and sprinted down the driveway like a guilty teenager caught shoplifting candy. I didn't chase him. I didn't have to. The taller one was frozen in place, his hands shaking, the zip ties still dangling awkwardly from his fingers. I took a deep breath, stepped outside, and stood nose to nose with him. What's your name? I asked. Tony, he muttered. Last name, Tony? Sorensen, he said. I just do odd jobs for the HOA. They said it was an enforcement task. I didn't know it was illegal. So your first thought when asked to arrest someone was, sure, let me get my zip ties? I asked, voice steady. I reached for the radio clipped to the inside of my robe. Dispatch, this is Chief Darrow. I've got a suspected impersonator on site, possible HOA involvement. Need a unit to roll by my place in 15. I looked back at Tony. You're not under arrest. Yet. But you're not going anywhere until we get some answers. Sit. He obeyed, sinking onto the porch step like a kid in timeout. I turned to look down the street. The runner, plastic badge guy, was gone. For now. But I had his license plate, and half the street probably caught the whole scene on Ring cameras. I'd follow up later. First, I needed to understand why a neighborhood association thought it could field its own private enforcement division. I looked back at Tony. Who sent you? Darlene, he said. She's the HOA president. Said there were too many violations in the neighborhood, and the city wasn't enforcing fast enough. So she put together a team to do it privately. A team? I repeated. So there's more of you? He nodded. They got shirts, ID cards, even a newsletter. I just hand out citations and sometimes do stuff like this. I sat down on the porch beside him. Tony, I said, you're lucky. You just stumbled into the one yard in this county where you'll get a warning instead of a taser. He swallowed hard. Thanks, he whispered. Don't thank me yet, I said. I'm going to find out just how deep this fake officer scam goes. And Darlene? She's about to learn what real enforcement looks like. The porch was quiet again, except for the rustle of leaves and the faint hum of cicadas in the distance. Tony sat there like a deflated scarecrow, still processing the fact that the man he tried to detain with zip ties was the county's chief of police. I didn't press him for more just yet. Letting someone sit with their panic is often more effective than barking questions. But the clock was ticking. I knew this situation wasn't isolated. If the HOA was bold enough to send fake officers to my house, how many others had been threatened, coerced, or intimidated into silence? The worst part wasn't the absurdity of it, it was that they clearly thought they could get away with it. When the patrol unit arrived, I briefed Officer Ramirez quietly by the curb. She'd worked under me for 4 years and didn't bat an eye when I explained the HOA's stunt. She just nodded, jotted down the truck's license plate, and radioed it in. Tony was cooperative now, maybe too cooperative. That kind of obedience usually meant guilt or fear. Maybe both. As we drove him down to the station for a formal statement, I rode shotgun and kept my eyes on his twitching hands. Tony, I said calmly, how long has this been going on? He hesitated. Couple months. At first it was just notes on doors. Violation warnings. But then Darlene started hiring people, guys like me, to knock on doors and scare folks into fixing stuff fast. Said she had the board's full support. She paying you? I asked. Cash? He nodded. $100 a day. Under the table. I whistled low. And you never once thought, maybe impersonating a cop for pocket change is a bad idea? I didn't think it was that serious. He muttered. She made it sound like community patrol. You know, neighbor-to-neighbor accountability. I turned to look at him. With badges and zip ties? He shut up after that. Back at the station, I let Ramirez handle the booking while I headed to my office. I didn't sit. I paced. Every time I thought about Darlene's smug voice and the manufactured authority she was spreading through the neighborhood like a virus, I felt the old heat rise in my chest. She turned the HOA into a shadow police force. And people probably listened, because she looked the part. Pearls, pristine blazers, and that terrifying ability to turn gossip into policy. I pulled up my secure email and drafted a quick internal memo to our legal affairs division. I also pinged our community outreach officer. If there were victims of this nonsense, we needed to know. Quietly. An hour later, I was back in my car heading toward the HOA office. Not as the chief, but as a homeowner. They met once a week in a small building with glass doors and polished laminate flooring that always smelled like lemon cleaner and self-importance. I walked in and didn't introduce myself. I let the front desk volunteer ask the usual question. Do you have an appointment? I said. No. But I think Darlene will want to see me. She started to object, but I'd already walked past her. The meeting room had that fake sense of order, a long plastic table, a dozen chairs, bottled water lined up like they were expecting royalty. Darlene was mid-sentence, lecturing a nervous homeowner about gutter discoloration. If we let you get away with mismatched paint, Mr. Grant, the whole neighborhood will collapse into chaos. That's when I stepped in. Actually, Darlene, I think this neighborhood's been collapsing under your rule for a while now. Her head whipped around. She blinked twice. Recognition hit her face like a cold slap. Chief Darrow, she said, trying to regain composure. To what do we owe the visit? I held up my phone. You sent men to my house, Darlene. Not code enforcement. Not city officers. Men wearing fake uniforms trying to detain me with plastic zip ties. You want to explain that? The room went dead quiet. One board member slowly turned his chair away like maybe invisibility was an option. Another took a sip of water and nearly choked. Darlene cleared her throat. They were volunteers. A community initiative. There's been a lack of response from the actual city when it comes to enforcing neighborhood regulations, so the board authorized a citizen enforcement task. Cut the nonsense. I interrupted. You printed badges. You sent people door to door under threat of detainment. That's not a task force, Darlene. That's impersonation of law enforcement. A felony. She raised her chin. We were simply doing what the city refuses to do. Keeping our community safe and in order. I took 2 steps toward her and lowered my voice. You hired men with criminal records to go around threatening residents with arrest. You paid them in cash. You distributed fake credentials. You are dangerously close to running an illegal private security outfit under the illusion of civic duty. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't let her. You're not above the law because you hold a clipboard and quote bylaws out of context. And you definitely don't have the authority to arrest anyone. There was a beat of silence. Then one of the board members, an older guy with thick glasses and a clearly fake smile, leaned forward. Surely we can come to an understanding here. No need to make this public. That line set me off more than anything else. It is public. You made it public the moment you turned enforcement into theater and targeted people in their own homes. And now that you've done it to me, I'll make sure every single incident gets investigated. You're not a government. You're a homeowners association. Your reach ends at the edge of the sidewalk. Darlene's hands were trembling now. Not fear, necessarily. Anger. She wasn't used to being challenged. I recognized the look in her eyes, entitlement dressed up as leadership. If you want a formal statement, she hissed, you can speak to our attorney. I already did, I said, bluffing just enough to watch her flinch. Expect subpoenas. And maybe rethink next week's brunch. As I turned to leave, I looked around the boardroom. Some faces looked relieved. Others terrified. 1 or 2 stared at the floor, embarrassed to be part of it. Good. That meant the foundation was starting to crack. Back at the station, Tony had finished his statement and was released under supervision. I reviewed the transcript, and it confirmed what I feared. This wasn't a rogue incident. Darlene had orchestrated multiple enforcement visits over the past 2 months. A few involved threats. One even escalated into physical confrontation. But victims didn't speak out. Because they were afraid. Because the HOA had made them feel like they had no choice. Until now. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. This wasn't just going to be an investigation. It was going to be a storm. But for the first time in weeks, I welcomed it. Let the storm come. Because this time, the law wasn't hiding behind paperwork. It was standing right on the porch, coffee in hand, badge in the other. And it wasn't going anywhere. It started before the sun was up. At 5:17 in the morning, the warrant team rolled out in unmarked SUVs with coffee in hand and steel in their eyes. The legal team had moved fast. Between Tony's confession, body cam footage, An HOA record subpoenaed through the city's attorney. We had enough evidence to make this something more than a slap on the wrist. This was organized impersonation of law enforcement. This was coercion. This was a pattern. And for the first time, we had it documented, witnessed, and stitched together with names, dates, and HOA memos so self-incriminating they might as well have signed confession letters at the bottom. The neighborhood was silent as the team swept into the HOA building. It was still locked when they arrived, but our search warrant said otherwise. They moved through it methodically, room by room, pulling files, hard drives, meeting transcripts, and everything marked Volunteer Enforcement Program. Inside a locked drawer, they found a list with resident names and risk levels, assigned beside each address. Red ink. Codes. Checkmarks. It read less like an HOA violation tracker and more like a surveillance dossier. Next to my name, someone had written, Fence. Refused compliance. Needs personal visit. By noon, Darlene was in custody. She was dressed in pastel pink and clutching her phone when two real officers approached her during a neighborhood brunch event in the community park. She was in the middle of a speech about revitalizing community morale. The irony was heavy. I wasn't there when they cuffed her. I didn't need to be. But I heard she tried to invoke some made-up HOA clause that gave her limited authority over municipal interference. The look on her face, apparently, was priceless when the officer leaned in and said, Ma'am, we're municipal interference. Back at the station, she asked for a lawyer and refused to speak, but the evidence did most of the talking. Multiple HOA members had already broken ranks. They didn't want to go down with her, and the threat of losing their own homes, or worse, was enough to make them fold. A few confessed in full. One cried. Another offered to testify if he could avoid being named publicly. It became clear this wasn't some simple misunderstanding. Darlene had built a web of fear, threading control through policy, privilege, and pressure. What started as warnings and code violations had turned into physical confrontations. One couple had received a fine for parking a truck on their gravel driveway, then found their vehicle towed 2 days later by an unmarked service with no city contract. Another resident said she was told if she didn't fix her backyard lighting, the HOA would involve their security enforcement, the same zip-tie brigade that had shown up at my door. For days, the story spread like wildfire. Local media got wind of it when an anonymous tipster leaked footage of Darlene being walked to a cruiser in handcuffs. That video hit social media and exploded. Suddenly, every homeowner with a grudge against their HOA started sharing stories. Most had been annoyed. A few had been afraid. Some had already moved out quietly just to avoid the constant harassment. It was like lifting the lid on a pot that had been boiling for years. And now the steam was hissing out in every direction. At the next emergency meeting of the HOA, what was left of it, a vote was called to dissolve the current board entirely. The community center was packed. I stood at the back, in uniform this time, not speaking unless spoken to. The residents spoke instead. One man said his mother had been scared into removing her backyard swing set because someone in a shirt told her it was a violation. A single mother shared that her driveway was chalked with arrows after an enforcement visit. No one had ever admitted to it. Everyone knew it was intimidation. The vote passed with an overwhelming majority. The HOA was dissolved. The fallout continued for weeks. Civil suits were filed. Some residents pushed for criminal charges on those who had impersonated police, especially in cases where minors had been involved. Tony testified in exchange for a suspended sentence and community service, and in a strange way, he became a cautionary example. Not evil. Just stupid. And people needed to know where that line was drawn. As for me, things got quiet again. The porch was mine. The fence? It stayed exactly the way it was. No one knocked anymore unless it was a neighbor dropping off pie or asking if the local stray dog had wandered onto my lawn again. One morning, I found a thank you note taped to the fence. It was written in shaky handwriting. An older woman from 2 streets over. She said she'd lived in fear of Darlene for 3 years. that she had cried watching the video of her arrest. That for the first time, she felt safe in her own home. That's when I knew it had been worth it. The hassle, the paperwork, the headlines, it had all been worth it. Not because I'd caught some big-time criminal, but because justice showed up where it mattered most. On driveways. On front porches. In backyards that were a little too cluttered for the HOA's taste. It reminded me why I wore the badge in the first place. Not for power. Not for control. But for people. For moments like this. A few weeks later, I replaced a little sign on my fence. The old one was faded, weather-beaten, and honestly overdue for an update. The new one was simple. Just a plaque, wood-carved, mounted with brass screws. It read, "Protected by common sense and actual law." Beneath that, just one word, "Welcome." And strangely enough, nobody had a problem with it.